Happy Friday morning, guys. I hope that you guys have had a good week. Manage the work week as best you can. We're going into the weekend to hopefully make good decisions, be positive, and have positive impact on each other. So I'm going to do something a little different this morning. Tomorrow is my father's birthday. And this morning when I climbed out of bed to get ready to come to the gym, my wife and son were still asleep, and somehow, like he does a lot of times, my 9-year-old son finds his way into the middle of our bed in the middle of the night. Now he's grown at this point, so that becomes uncomfortable. However, we have a very expensive bed, and I can understand why he wants to be there. But I was looking at them as I stood up and looking at my son, and with my father's birthday on my mind, I thought to myself, I wonder if I could be the father my dad is. And it got me to thinking, what does that mean? What does it mean to be the father my dad is? Well, there's a quote from a movie that is very negative in aspect to a father. However, it sticks out to me, and it's always stuck out to me as a very fitting image. The movie Fight Club, Tyler Durden makes a comment, and he says that our fathers were our models for God, and if our fathers bailed, what does that tell you about God? Now, again, that's a negative quote and a negative comment, but he's not wrong. My father is my model for God. And the things that I have learned in my life and that have made me who I am, I've learned from him. Now, some of you haven't had the opportunity that I have to grow up with a father in the home, to grow up with a father who lived the life that my father has lived. He has been the Christian that my father has been the minister that my father has been. And I can tell you that although I never truly appreciated it in my youth, I really, really have great amounts of empathy for you to not have the experience that I had. Because my dad is my model for God. So I wanted to tell you a few things and maybe encourage you a little bit today by telling you the things that I learned from him, the things that I have witnessed in him, the things that he taught me. Now, I'm going to apologize. I'm having a difficult time already getting through these moments without shedding a few tears, because I am that appreciative. But the first thing that I can tell you that I learned from my dad was, well, the first thing that's important in a family, to be a husband. Now, some of you instantly just said, well, the first thing has got to be to love God, and that's true, to be a good Christian, and that's true, and have God lead your home. But what I can tell you is that when my parents got married, my dad wasn't a Christian. I have no doubt that he probably didn't believe in God. I mean, they did believe in God, but he wasn't a church-going guy. My mother, on the other hand, was a daughter of a pastor. And a little side note is that her father, my grandfather, he moved his family from one part of the nation all the way to Cheyenne, Wyoming, and started a church. Had he not made that decision, had he not followed God's leadership, my parents never would have met, and I wouldn't be here. Now, my grandfather, Robert Richards, passed away quite some time ago. And he never felt like his ministry was successful in Wyoming because it didn't grow from a very, very small congregation basically in their home beyond that. But I can tell you that the success The success of his ministry is the salvation of my children, my family. So my father didn't start out as the godly leader of the home, but he did start out as a husband. And had it not been for that small church, they never would have met. The life wouldn't have happened. But what he did have is the principles in his life to be a good husband. He loves my mother. My dad epitomizes the scripture that says to love your wife as Christ loved the church and gave himself for it. See, Christ, he gave himself to his death, not just for the church, not just for the people, not just for those that worshiped him, but for people that hated him. That's how much love he had, and that's the love that my dad expresses in his daily life to my mother still to this day. When I was very, very young, we moved from Wyoming to Kansas City, Missouri. In Wyoming, my dad had his life, his family, his friends, his environment, his job. But my mother wasn't happy because she didn't have a lot of those things, and she was missing her relationship with God because she knew God. She knew the church. She knew things my dad didn't know. My dad didn't know anything about that. My dad had no interest in becoming a good church-going guy. But my dad did have an interest in doing whatever it took to make my mother happy. See, there was a quote that went around the internet a while back from an actor about how that it's not his responsibility to make his wife happy, and it's not his responsibility to bring her joy, and that's on your own, and you need to take care of yourself, and all this other nonsense. And I can tell you that just the example that we've seen in that guy's life wasn't that long ago. He was crying on television about how his wife had found another man. So I can tell you he was wrong. He doesn't understand the scripture. He doesn't understand the Bible. He doesn't understand the love that's required to have a successful marriage. He just doesn't understand what it takes to be a good husband. And I don't know the guy, but that's just what I've seen. And his words, well, they come back to bite him. My dad, on the other hand, he took it as his responsibility to make his spouse happy. Because that's what we do. That's what we should do. That's what he taught me. So my dad gave up everything and moved to Kansas City with no job, no future, no life. And it worked. The second thing about why it worked is because of his dedication to his family, his love. And a word that I'll tell you is going to go on in several of these little things that I can tell you about my dad today is that he had grit. My dad is the toughest guy I've ever met. And I say that telling you I've never seen my dad ever get in a confrontation with a person. One, because he's not had to. But two, that's one of the things my dad and I are different on. I've never seen my dad have to fight physically. But he's the toughest guy I've ever seen. Because I've seen him fight through every obstacle that could possibly be imagined. With nothing. My dad is the kind of guy who went out and made something. My dad is the guy who, for his family, for his wife, for his children, in order to put them in a situation to be in a church, to be with church family, to get saved, to find God, work 2, 3, 5, 6, 7 jobs at a time to put food on the table. Went hungry, went tired, just to take care of us. My dad is the kind of guy who would work himself to death. Literally, physically work himself to death. Just to see to it that my mother could have a dinner on a Friday night. That's what I grew up seeing. The second thing I will tell you about my dad that he taught me is how to be a father. My dad is a great father. When I look at my children, especially this morning when they were asleep, I think, man, I know my dad used to stay and watch us sleep. Sometimes because he worked himself to death and didn't get to see us when we were awake. Because he loved us that much. My dad sacrificed for us. I know that my parents both, and I hate to leave my mother out, but this is about the things learned from my dad. And I know that my parents went hungry for us to eat. I know that my parents went without. I know that my parents dodged bill collectors so we could have food on the table, made sacrifices. Because I saw it. Sometimes they didn't know it, I saw it, but I saw it. My dad never, ever allowed that to affect our relationship. He never allowed that to affect our home. He never allowed that to affect my childhood. We never went without. Not just things we needed, but things we wanted. He sacrificed a lot. My dad was my coach several times in sports throughout the years, but in life. Part of that was beating things into my hard head. Part of that was being a disciplinarian when I needed it, which I needed a lot. But a huge part of that was pushing me. See, my dad had been on his own since about 13 years old, which is unfathomable in these days to most people, but my dad's never had anything handed to him, ever. But he's successful in so many ways, and part of that is because of that grit, what he pushed me to have. Because I didn't go without the things my dad went without in childhood. I didn't go without parents. I didn't go without a father. I didn't go without a mother. I had all of those things, but my dad pushed me to have the same grit that he had to survive that. To never give up, to never stop, to know that that thing inside your heart that tells you this is what you need to do, this is your calling in life, this is where you're supposed to be, is so strong and so powerful that you lean on that when you get told no. You lean on that when things are fighting against you. You lean on that when obstacles are in your way, and you push, and you never give up, and you never quit. My dad taught me that. My dad could do anything. You want to talk about being a picture for God? I can tell you as a kid, my dad was capable of doing literally anything. He could fix anything. He was the smartest man I've ever met. He knew every answer to every question without Google. To this day, I have no idea how he knows as much as he knows. Because my dad is not a college-educated man. My dad is not a tradesmith. My dad is a hard-working, super talented, wonderful leader, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But my dad is also a GED guy. But he could do absolutely anything. I, on the other hand, have to spend about 3 hours on YouTube just to find out how to fix something before I even look at it. I want to be like that one day. The other thing that I'll tell you is that my dad instilled principles in me of restraint, of patience. He did that by teaching me. He did that by disciplining me. He did that by pushing me. But I can think of times in my life that I witnessed my dad's restraint. So you're defensive of your children, and I can think of one specific time that my dad and I worked in the same retail store. I had another coworker who was much older than me confront me over taking his sale. Now, that's not what happened. I helped a customer out and did my job, and he had a problem with it because it cost him commission. So he got in my face. We're talking a guy who's probably in his 70s now, but he's probably 55, 60 years old at the time, getting in an 18-year-old kid's face over a sale, over a $9 commission, right there in front of my father, who happened to be a hired manager in the store at the time. Now, I'm the kind of guy that could have cost me my job. I'm not going to lie to you folks. sort of thing doesn't go well with me. And to this day, I think about that moment and I think, man, why? Why did I let that go the way it did? Why did I just nod my head and tell him, sorry about your luck, and walk away? Well, I'll tell you why. Because my father was standing there. And I know that my father would have handled that for me if I needed. I know that if that man had raised his hand, I wouldn't have an opportunity to do what I do. But my dad's level of restraint stopped me in my tracks. Because my dad is the lion who doesn't worry about the opinion of sheep. He taught me that in that moment, whether he knows it or not. The third thing I'll tell you about my dad is that my dad is a great minister. My dad is a true pastor's heart, and my dad got saved when I was about 4 years old and went into youth ministry. And this is what I'll tell you about my dad is not the greatest speaker. For years we made fun of my dad because when my dad speaks publicly, he says in between every other word, like to the point that you can count it and it gets ridiculous. Sorry, Dad, it's true. He's not the greatest teacher when it comes to the depths of the Bible. He's not the great evangelizer when it comes to going out and speaking to people in their hearts to draw them into God. But my dad is a great pastor. See, Psalms 82:3 says to defend the poor and the fatherless, do justice to the afflicted and the needy. My dad grew up fatherless. My dad's dad left when he was 7 years old. My dad's mom left when he was, I believe, about 12. By the time he was 14 or 15, his older brothers had kicked him out on his own. He was fatherless. My dad knows what it's like to be that guy, to be that kid, to be that teenager, to be that young adult, that man who didn't have that. So my dad has been a father to the fatherless for years. I have seen my dad be the father figure for employees, for friends, for kids in our neighborhood, for grown men, for his peers. I have seen him be the father to them that he's been to me. He's a great pastor. And part of that is being the great leader that he is. My dad, again, is such a talented leader, such a talented businessman. I tell people, and I've said this for years, that had he grown up in a different environment, my father would have been Donald Trump level successful. We grew up poor, my dad working his butt off, my mom working her butt off, homeschooling us as children, coaching sports, having us in church 4, 5, 6 times a week, barely making ends meet, just running himself ragged. But still finding a way to feed us. I saw my dad in my teenage years get a job on the back dock of Sears unloading trucks, work his way up to being a store manager, to being transfer store manager, to working in jobs in that organization that, he wasn't qualified to apply for. Now, I was an adult before this happened, but the company that he works for now called him. They looked for him. They brought him over. He's been successful there. The things that I know as a leader, the things that I have tried to instill over the years in not just my family, but even as a supervisor in my previous job, I learned from him. To be patient. To be wise. Be slow to speak. To be willing to do whatever it takes. And by that I mean not just saying I will do whatever you guys do, but to be the first one to jump in and do it. My dad's the kind of guy that if he walks in a room and there's trash on the ground, he's going to pick it up. He's not going to tell you to do it. My dad is also the kind of guy that's willing to break down your issues, your insufficiencies, your deficiencies, and say to the finest, most minute detail and find the source of the problem. My dad leads you from where you are, not from where he expects you to be. My dad's success in life has become the fact that he's firm in who he is. My dad has taught me something that I can tell you is probably the most like thing that I have ever been to him, and I learned this from him, and that's you never sacrifice who you are for a title. Being political is not worth your soul. You do the right thing even when it's not the right thing. You stand up when it needs to be stand up. You stand fast even if it costs you that promotion, that job, that money, whatever it is. You do the right thing. You never stop pursuing your dreams. You never stop pushing for where you want to be. And you recognize that no matter how much natural talent you may have in a role, it takes effort and it takes time to be successful. That's grit. The reason that I kept putting in for those promotions at work after being told no, the reason that I kept pushing and pushing and pushing after being told it's never going to happen. You're not one of the boys. You're not like-minded. You don't fit in like us. You're too aggressive. You're too argumentative. You're too difficult to be a team player. Let me tell you something. I was a team player because the only reason I put in for those things is because I was there for the team more than anything else. And the people that told me that I'm not a team player, they were not. Facts. But the reason that I kept pushing is because my desire to do the right thing that was instilled in my heart by my father was backed up by the grit that I watched him put into me. And the last thing that I want to tell you about my dad is that my dad has two attributes that I hope one day I can have. That I hope that one day when my son or my 4 daughters are watching over their children in their sleep, that they can think back and say, I want to be like my dad. My dad has grace and honor. So what's that mean? What is that a picture of? Well, first let's talk about honor. I mentioned previously how my dad's childhood went, and it's so much deeper than that, but I'm not here to tell his testimony. That's his story. But what I'll tell you is what I can remember of it. I remember sitting in the living room of our house in Kansas City on Genesee Street while my newly saved father was on the phone with his mother. And his mother was telling him awful things, blaming him for everything in his life. And what I can tell you is that she took all of her anger and frustration of her life and her bad decisions out on him. And I remember how much that hurt me. I barely knew the woman. But my dad called her because he wanted her to know that he had found God, and he was calling her because he wanted to make amends in his life. She didn't want that. She turned her back to it. But I've never seen my father be bitter. I never heard him speak an ill word of her in my life. My dad's dad I've met, I believe, twice in my life, maybe 3 times. And I'm not going to express my opinions because I don't know him. I really don't. But I know how I feel knowing my dad's childhood was the way it was because of him. But my dad disciplined me once. My dad scorned me, rebuked me years and years ago because he had told me I should reach out to my grandfather for something or to tell him something. And my response was, I could care less what that man has to say. I have no use for him. My dad shut me down right there in that moment. My dad, who has every right to live his life in anger, with malice, against this man, shut me down and told me I need to show some honor and respect. Now, I didn't appreciate it at the time. I didn't recognize it at the time, but now looking back on it, my dad was extending the grace of God. Not only was my dad extending the grace of God to my father, or to his father, he was expressing it to me by showing me that no matter what, there are things that I'm required to do, and that is to show honor. To honor your father and your mother. To honor his father and mother. Because there are certain things in life we have to do whether we like it or not. And when we make mistakes, God gives us the grace. God gives them the grace. Because at the end of the day, my dad's goal was not ever going to be for my grandfather to become a good man. And he may be, I don't know the guy. But I can assure you that my father wants to do everything possible to make sure that he extended the hand, the olive branch, the love of Christ to him. I am not at the point in my life where I can extend such grace. There are people that I still hold begrudging feelings towards. There are people that I still have problems with. There's people that I have no use for. One day I hope that I can be like my father, that I can have that grace for others, because if that's the case, if I can extend that grace to those people that have harmed and absolutely did everything they could to destroy me, maybe I can be like my dad. Because then, with all of that towards my enemies, to love those that I have decided are my enemies, to give myself for them, to show honor and respect when they don't really do anything to deserve it, then there's absolutely guaranteed evidence that my children will have experienced that every day, because I do love them. I am striving to be like my dad. So I can tell you, if you didn't have that growing up, I'm sorry. But I'm truly thankful I did. Maybe the lessons that he taught me, the very few that I've been able to share with you today, because there are so many more, maybe that'll help you, as it's helped me, to go forward. And maybe you can try to be like my dad too. I hope you guys have a great day. Have a great weekend. Dad, I love you. Happy birthday. I'll see you in a few days.